Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to start out with brief mention of two O-line basketball players from Brooklyn. Both guys, tough guys from the streets of New York who left their mark on the NBA. The first is Bobby Wanzer, who died recently at the age of 94, and Bobby Wanzer was one of the first great guards in the NBA in the early 1950s. He was the first man to shoot over 90% from the free throw line. He was a wicked shooter and passer, and he led the Rochester Royals to the 1951 NBA title. His play was instrumental in the decisive seventh game against the New York Knicks. He served in the Marines during World War II, and before and after he was a standout collegian at Seton Hall. In the mid-50s, he became a player-coach for the Royals, and he made the NBA Hall of Fame in 1987. Here's a brief clip on Bobby Wanzer.
Seton Hall grad Bobby Wanzer of Rochester displays to one and all that there is still a spot in basketball for the little man.
Bobby Wanzer is the complete ball player. In the Hall of Fame, and he justly deserves it and earns it.
Wanzer works his way into the corner. Passes out. Gets a return pass. Fakes. Then splits the cords with an arching set.
East Coast Red Auerbach of the Boston Celtics on the left greets Western mentor Bobby Wanzer of the Rochester Royals. Wanzer, a fine backcourt man, is the only playing coach in the NBA.
What got me here, I think that playing with good ball players, that helps you along the way. You strive to equal their perfection, and it worked out rather well for me. We were always a winning ball club. We won the NBA championship. You feel that you're a winner, and I think that's the most important thing.
On a historical note, a lot of sports franchises changed cities after World War II, the most notable being the Brooklyn Dodgers moving to Los Angeles. But actually, one of the first franchises to change cities was the Rochester Royals. They moved from Rochester to Cincinnati in the mid-50s. Cincinnati was a good basketball town at the time, and early on they managed the territorial draft rights to one of the great basketball players of all time, Oscar Robertson. The Royals moved from Rochester to Cincinnati. By the way, two of the stars who played for the Royals during those years were Jack Twyman and Maurice Stokes, and we've done the Jack Twyman podcast. Later, they became the Kansas City Kings in the 1970s, and then became what they are today, the Sacramento Kings. But the only NBA title they ever won was when they were in Rochester, with Bobby Wanzer and his backcourt mate Bob Davies as the stars. We're going to move on now to another kid off the streets of Brooklyn, 3 years younger than Bobby Wanzer, Johnny Bach, who died recently at the age of 91. Also a very tough guy and a Marine. He was a good basketball player, but he made his name as a coach. He coached Fordham University for 18 years, went on to Penn State, did a little in the NBA, and then he was hired by the Chicago Bulls to become their defensive coach to complement Tex Winter as their offensive coach. First with Doug Collins, who he coached in the 72 Olympics, and then with Phil Jackson. It was Johnny Bach who constructed the great Bulls defenses of their championship teams of the 1990s, starring Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and Horace Grant. He called them the Dobermans because he unleashed them on other teams. He gave them an ace of spades after key wins, the card of death, and he helped mold the Bulls into a resilient team. Here's a little clip on Johnny Bach, and you'll hear Phil Jackson in there.
50 years in coaching, Johnny Bach.
Scottie Pippen and Johnny Bach conferring on the bench.
They'll be talking about the defense tonight, I'm sure, the two of them.
This is what assistant coach Johnny Bach calls unleashing the Doberman.
Johnny Bach, who was an old-time coach from college that came to the NBA and learned a lot of information, and had ability to really talk to players, work with players.
How would you like to be remembered? Someone who loved basketball, had great opportunities. Hey, I'm lucky.
Johnny Bach was the epitome of a really tough guy, but in his personal life, ironically, he was quite a sensitive guy and an accomplished artist. We're going to move on now to Abe Vigoda, who died recently at the age of 94. He was a nice Jewish boy born in Brooklyn about 4 months before Bobby Wanzer. As I've said before, a lot of stuff going on in Brooklyn in the 19-teens and 20s. His father was a tailor on the Lower East Side, but he wanted to go into the theater. Did some stuff in the theater in the 1930s. I wonder if he did anything in the Yiddish theater on 2nd Avenue back then. I didn't see anything about that in the obits. But in the 1960s, he actually played Richard III in Central Park. But he's best known for two roles. The first role was in Godfather 1 and Godfather 2. He was the gangster Sal Tessio. He was a friend of Don Corleone from way back, but then he tried to double-cross his son Michael, Michael put the hit out on him. One of the famous scenes in movies, this is Abe Vigoda as Saul Tessio and Robert Duvall as Tom Hagen right before they take Tessio for a ride. He pleads with the consigliere to intervene for old time's sake.
I hope Mike can get us a good deal in there. Sure he will.
Sal, Tom, the boss says we'll come in a separate car. He says for you two to go on ahead.
Hell, you can't do that. It screws up all my arrangements.
Well, that's what he said.
I can't go either, Sal.
Don't, Mike. It was only business. I always liked him.
He understands that.
Excuse me, Sal. Huh?
Tom, can you get me off the hook? For old time's sake.
Can't do it, Sally.
It was only business. How many times has that line been used since then? His other famous role was as Detective Sergeant Fish on the 1970s ensemble sitcom Barney Miller. Great show. Here's the theme song from Barney Miller. In Barney Miller, they always played off the fact that Fish was the oldest detective, and in the 1980s, People magazine reported that Abe Vigoda had died when he was still very much alive, and the late-night talk shows picked up on it. David Letterman and Conan O'Brien, they made big fun of it. There was even a website devoted to it, Is Abe Vigoda Dead or Alive? But I have to tell you, Abe Vigoda was a very, very good sport about it, so I think it's reasonable to say Abe Vigoda was a good guy, an excellent actor with a good sense of humor. We're going to move on now to our feature tonight, Marvin Minsky, who died recently at the age of 88. An absolutely brilliant man who was one of the pioneers of artificial intelligence. Marvin Minsky was a nice Jewish boy born in New York City. I think he was born in Manhattan. He's the only one of our subjects tonight who wasn't born in Brooklyn. For prep school, he went to Ethical Culture Fieldston School, which is also the school that J. Robert Oppenheimer and Gil Scott-Heron graduated from. We did the podcast on Gil Scott-Heron. Stephen Sondheim, Diane Arbus, and Sean Lennon also went there. And Marvin Minsky had a distinguished academic career even before going into artificial intelligence, and here's a description of it.
Marvin Minsky, now known as the father of artificial intelligence, was born in New York City on August 9, 1927. He joined the Navy at the age of 17 and served during the final months of World War II. After leaving the service, he continued his education as a physics major at Harvard University. During his time at Harvard, he became fascinated with the workings of the mind and shifted his focus to psychology. However, he graduated from Harvard with a bachelor's degree in mathematics. Minsky then began working on his doctorate in mathematics at Princeton University. There he invented what he called the Stochastic Neural Analog Reinforcement Computer, or SNARC, which was one of the first machines ever to simulate the neurological process of learning. After presenting his research to a committee that included the famous father of the modern computer, John von Neumann, he received his PhD from Princeton in 1954, and returned to Harvard to continue his research, and also work on projects in other fields, such as developing a more powerful and reliable microscope. In 1960, Minsky published a paper titled Steps Towards Artificial Intelligence. It laid the groundwork for all future work on AI by establishing models for understanding perception and information processing. It was for these and similar works that Minsky won his Turing Award, but he made his most significant contributions to artificial intelligence in the decade following his award. In the mid-1970s, Minsky published his most influential work, A Framework for Representing Knowledge. In it, he presented his theory of frames, a model that describes how events and situations are represented in the mind. His basic theory was that situations may be represented as structures or frames with many replaceable pieces. Similar frames are related to each other such that when encountered with a new object or situation, a person will select a similar existing frame and modify the pieces that do not pertain to the new situation. For instance, to incorporate the experience of attending a birthday party, a person may take a frame representing a previous birthday party and replace the pieces representing the venue, host, and list of presents. This theory was so effective that many artificial intelligence programs directly represent knowledge as frames, exactly as he outlined in his theory. Over the next few decades, Minsky continued to contribute models and theories to the field of artificial intelligence.
Here's Minsky talking about the workings of the brain.
You know, there's about 400 different parts of the brain which seem to have different functions. Nobody knows how most of them work in detail, but we do know that There are lots of different things in there, and they don't always work together. I like Freud's theory that most of them are canceling each other out. So if you think of yourself as a sort of a city with 100 resources, then when you're afraid, for example, you may discard your long-range goals, but you may think deeply and focus on exactly how to achieve that particular goal. You throw everything else away. You become a monomaniac. All you care about is not stepping out on that platform. And when you're hungry, food becomes more attractive and so forth. So I see emotions as highly evolved subsets of your capability. Emotion is not something added to thought. An emotional state is what you get when you remove 100 or 200 of your normally available resources. So thinking of emotions as something less than thinking is immensely productive, and I hope in the next few years to show that this will lead to smart machines. And the main idea is, in fact, that the core of a really smart machine is one that recognizes that a certain kind of problem is facing you. This is a problem of such and such a type, and therefore there's a certain way or ways of thinking that are good for that problem. So I think the future main problem of psychology is to classify types of predicaments, types of situations, types of obstacles, and also to classify available and possible ways to think and pair them up. So you see, it's almost like a Pavlovian. We lost the first 100 years of psychology by really trivial theories where you say, how do people learn how to react to a situation? What I'm saying is, after we go through a lot of levels, including designing a huge messy system with thousands of parts, we'll end up again with the central problem of psychology saying, what are the, not what are these situations, but what are the kinds of problems and what are the kinds of strategies? How do you learn them? How do you connect them up? How does a really creative person invent a new way of thinking out of the available resources? So I think in the next 20 years, if we can get rid of all of the traditional approaches to artificial intelligence, like neural nets and genetic algorithms and rule-based systems, and just turn our sights a little bit higher to say, can we make a system that can use all those things for the right kind of problem? Some problems are good for neural nets. We know that others, neural nets are hopeless on them. Genetic algorithms are great for certain things. I suspect I know what they're bad at, and I won't tell you.
Here's a little bit from the MIT website obituary on Dr. Minsky. Minsky viewed the brain as a machine whose functioning can be studied and replicated in a computer, which would teach us, in turn, to better understand the human brain and higher-level mental functions. How might we endow machines with common sense, the knowledge humans acquire every day through experience? How, for example, do we teach a sophisticated computer that to drag an object on a string you need to pull, not push? A concept easily mastered by a 2-year-old child. As a young scientist, he lunched with Albert Einstein, but couldn't understand him because of his German accent. He had many conversations with the computer genius John von Neumann. His home became a repository for all manner of artifacts and icons, including the bongos that physicist Richard Feynman liked to play when he visited. Looming over the bongos was a 1950s vintage robot, straight out of the imagination of novelist Isaac Asimov, another pal who would drop in for Minsky parties. His friends included science fiction writers Arthur C. Clarke and Robert Heinlein, and filmmaker Stanley Kubrick. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. That mention of Minsky being friends with Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick is interesting because Arthur C. Clarke wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey, and of course Kubrick's portrayal of Hal, the computer, is the classical portrayal of artificial intelligence. So it's a pretty safe bet that Minsky had an influence on the book and the movie. And Minsky once commented in an interview how remarkably accurate they were with their predictions. With that, we're going to close with the song that Hal was taught by his creator, which incidentally was the first song that a computer ever sang in 1961. We'll have a little bit of Hal sing it from the 1968 film, and a little of the actual IBM computer that first sang it in 1961. My grandmother used to sing it to me when I was a little boy.
My instructor was Mr. Langley, and he taught me to sing a song. If you'd like to hear it, I can sing it for you.
Yes, I'd like to hear it, Hal. Sing it for me.
It's called Daisy. Daisy.